In this episode, we are going to be having a conversation about coronal polishing, how we do it, when we use it, where we use it, how it's changed, how it's evolved, and what are we doing, where are we going, and why do we do coronal polishing? Students really struggle with the learning process of coronal polishing. I think the best people that do coronal polishing easily are the people that use sewing machines because they've got that hand-foot coordination down before they even go into dental hygiene school. So for all you sewers out there, kudos to you. Although now we have foot-free hand pieces that don't even need the foot pedal. Most likely in school though, you're going to be using a rheostat, that foot pedal, to control the movement of the polisher. So in this episode, we'll talk about coronal polishing and some of my thoughts and opinions, and some of the struggles I had as a student when I was learning about coronal polishing, as well as some of the struggles I have as an educator teaching coronal polishing and where we're headed with airflow technology. So if that's something that interests you, then take a listen. Hey everyone, welcome to the Happy Flosser podcast. My name is Billy Lunt. I am your host, and I am here to talk to you about all things dental hygiene to support you on your journey through the dental hygiene program. Welcome, so glad to have you. Hey, are you in dental hygiene school or just got your acceptance letter and just started dental hygiene school and you're worried about how you're going to fit it all in, what the evaluations are like, what the key strategies you need to set up in order to be successful? You don't want to have worked all this time to get accepted into dental hygiene school only to make some pretty major errors in your first and second semester. I've put together a course that will really help you set yourself straight right out of the gate and get yourself started on the right foot in dental hygiene school. Whether or not you're just entering school or you've done your prerequisites and you're just well on your way halfway through, this course is designed to help get you straight and keep you straight so that you can become a dental hygienist. Click the link in the show notes and check it out. All right, so let's talk about coronal polishing and airflow technology. This is a hot topic. And the reason why it's a hot topic, in my opinion, is because it's changed and evolved so much over the course of my career. And when I graduated, I was super confused about polishing. We were taught selective polishing, which means that you only polish the teeth that have stain after you're done with instrumentation. Okay, so you're removing the biofilm with a cleaning agent and you're removing the stain with a polishing agent. And that was a little bit conflicting because my own perception as a patient was that I go in, I have my teeth cleaned, and then they polish all of my teeth. They feel nice and shiny and smooth, and then I leave. So why was there this selective polishing being taught? And looking at the evidence, we were taught that polishing with a polishing agent, something that has grit to it, removed the microlayers of fluoride-rich enamel from the tooth surface. And that made perfect sense to me. But when I got out into the field, it was a hard sell. If I started explaining to patients that now I'm going to selectively polish your teeth, they were in conflict. They had never heard of this thing before, and it made no sense to them. But if there's no stain present, you use a cleaning agent, right? Toothpaste. And if stain is present, you would use the least abrasive polishing agent that you can find. And the other misconception, some patients actually believe that the polishing part was the cleaning. So you can imagine that as a new graduate, it was lots of conversations around this coronal polishing that we were doing. And it's just used at the end, right? And we have to be careful where we're using it because it's just for the crowns of the teeth. It can cause sensitivity on the root surfaces. You don't use it following periodontal procedures, and you don't want to use it around restorations or implants. And so, trotting along through my career, coronal polishing was challenging. In school, we did selective polishing and we were taught the theories behind selective polishing, and it made perfect sense to me as a clinician, but not necessarily as a patient. So then, fast forward out into the career, I had a lot of self reflection around the idea of coronal polishing. So, my remedy to the situation was to use very light pressure and the lowest grit I could find and use it on all of my patients unless there was contraindications, which have never changed. People with respiratory issues, immunocompromised patients, patients with communicable diseases, or areas of demineralizations, you want to skip those when you're thinking about coronal polishing. And then the technique was what I was taught in school, right? You're at a 90-degree angle, you're starting at the gingival third, you're doing pat, 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 and you're overlapping your strokes to cover the whole surface. And I did do that, but I used the lightest pressure I could come up with and the lowest grit I could find to kind of meet the patient in the middle of what their perceptions of polishing was and what the science told me the polishing should be. Then there was a transition, a certain period of time, and people graduating at different times had different understandings of polishing. So then polishing was moved to the beginning of the appointment, right? You finish your assessment and then you polish your patient to remove the biofilm, and then you start your instrumentation to remove the calculus deposits. And then when you're all finished, you floss the teeth and the patient is complete. And that shift was quite interesting, talking patients through that process. And I have to say, that type of process, the patient left at the end of the appointment and things felt really clean. And it was a little easier to explain that process to a patient. Well, we're going to get all the biofilm off so we can see the teeth, right? So that we can use our instruments. And that made sense in my brain that it was more of a selective polishing to remove biofilm. And then airflow technology came out, polishing. And this is high pressure stream of water mixed with glycine. And this is fantastic for biofilm management. Airflow technology can be used on any surface of the tooth, including the root surfaces. And you even have little additional pieces that you can implement so that you can get into the furcation and the root surface areas. So it doesn't just manage the biofilm on the crowns of the teeth. It can be used on implants, it can be used on restorations. So it's like, oh my goodness, this kind of takes coronal polishing to the next level, having airflow technology. So this makes perfect sense, especially for our periodontal patients, because of the benefits of the glycine in biofilm management and how it helps with stain removal. It doesn't cause sensitivity. It can be easily used on the root surfaces. So it's kind of like a hygienist's dream. And then it takes all that evidence-based research and combines it into the reason why we've been polishing for 100 years and meshes it together into something that's new and beautiful and a little easier to explain to the patient. So why are we still doing coronal polishing? Well, airflow technology has not been implemented widely. So I look at coronal polishing and airflow technology like this weird transition that we had when we were changing from film processing radiographs to digital radiographs that now have AI technology. It's going to take some time. So if you are in that transition, which is right now, for airflow from coronal polishing, you're going to need to know how to do both. You're going to need to understand the philosophy and the techniques of both. Just like those clinicians who graduated needing to know how to process film and then had to learn digital radiography. So I want to look at coronal polishing like something that you need to know, you need to understand, because sometimes you will utilize that. And you'll also need to learn airflow technology because that is where we're headed in the arena of polishing. So airflow technology uses glycine powder and a high stream of water, and it can be used in those deeper pockets in the furcations, on the implants. It can be used to remove the biofilm and stain from the crowns and the roots of the teeth. And then you can change it. Like I said, a periflow nozzle can be used for those deeper periodontally involved areas. So think about disrupting that biofilm in those furcation regions and the type of response you're going to get with healing for your patient. The challenges that I faced with coronal polishing was that because we were selective polishing, I didn't feel like I had a lot of polishing experience when I graduated. And I'll tell you what, don't worry about that if you're a student, because it didn't take long out in the field to get really good at polishing. I felt like I had a really hard time managing the rheostat, the foot pedal, getting the right speed. I felt like I was like gassing it, and it would go really fast and then really slow. And then as a result, I was splattering the prophy paste all over the place and all over the patient. And so there was nothing smooth, or I didn't have any finesse, I guess is what I'll say. There was nothing smooth about my polishing technique when I was in school. It doesn't take long when you graduate, because you are going to be polishing all the time, to recognize that your skill will improve rapidly. So I wouldn't even worry about that. What I will say is I've had every technique of polishing used on me. I've had clinicians who use something very coarse, and you can tell when they go to rinse it out, and they're very heavy-handed when they polish. And then I've had other clinicians that are very light and fluffy, and they just tap the tooth once as they go along. You want to make sure that you are removing the biofilm. If you're going to polish the tooth, make sure you at least remove the biofilm and you're doing it effectively. If you work in an office where you're using airflow technology, awesome, right? Use it to the best of your ability. The debate is out there as to when and how we should polish and what should we be using. Just like that transition from film radiographs to digital radiographs, the conversations have to be had, because the conversations is what sparks the change and the growth and the opportunity for improvement in the operatory. I really loved it as a clinician when I started polishing after I finished the assessment, before I started doing instrumentation, because it would remove all the biofilm out of the way off the crown surfaces. I actually felt like my polishing wasn't as aggressive because I could remove the biofilm. It kind of gave me a clean environment to work in, and the patient didn't feel like they ate a peanut butter sandwich at the beach when they were at the end of the appointment, like they will when you polish at the end. It wasn't until I started using airflow technology that I was like, oh my gosh, coronal polishing is like a dinosaur. Airflow technology, because it uses the glycine powder and because it uses the high stream of water and air together, it's so effective at managing the biofilm and removing the biofilm and stain in a really effective way. We are the profession of people that get into the grooves, and we want to get into all those little nooks and crannies to help manage that biofilm and help our patients, especially our periodontally involved patients or our patients who struggle with a lot of decay. So we want to get in there and manage that biofilm, and the airflow technology does just that. So I was going to put a podcast together on the how-tos of coronal polishing and airflow, but I was like, you know what? This is not what our students need. Our students need to hear that we struggle too as clinicians with it, and that we are on the cusp of change and we're kind of moving in that direction. It's going to be interesting to see where airflow technology goes. I'm really excited about the airflow technology. I'll be even more interested to see what happens to coronal polishing as airflow technology becomes more commonplace in all of the offices. I do believe airflow technology will replace coronal polishing at some point, at least for our adult populations. I've always found airflow to be a little more challenging to use on our little people. So maybe that's where coronal polishing belongs, on the primary dentition or in our mixed dentition phase for our patients. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, or how you feel about coronal polishing, or what you're excited about for the future of airflow technology as we move forward in our profession, transitioning in and out of different things based on what the evidence is telling us. Just because we've always done something a certain way doesn't mean it's the best way. So I challenge you to think outside the box. Airflow technology is definitely up and coming, And coronal polishing is a skill that you need to learn. So I challenge you to read the research and come up with your own thoughts and opinions about coronal polishing and airflow and move forward in that direction. Are you looking for study sheets? I've created study sheets that cover the content of this episode. If you're interested or that's something that's going to help you on your learning journey, you can click the link listed right in the description of these show notes. Happy studying! I would invite you to send me any questions that you need answered. Questions come up when you listen to this podcast. I have a link in the show notes, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Also, I would appreciate a review if you have time to leave one. Thank you so much.